Hey everybody, this is David Chattel, CEO of NGL Collective, and welcome to another episode of Hispanicize Hangout. Today, I am super pleased to welcome our guest, Maria Teresa Kumar, the founder and president of Voto Latino. Please say hello, Maria Teresa.
Thanks for having me, David. Hi, Hispanicize world.
It's great to have you here. It's really great to have you here. So for those of you who don't know, Voto Latino is an organization dedicated to registering Latinx voters and encouraging civic participation. Election year, tons to talk about today that we're going to unpack. But first and foremost, Maria Teresa, I do see you are most likely at home right now. I would love to know how you're doing. Where are you? How has your sheltering in place experience been? Tell us all about it.
So we are very fortunate. My family and I, we live in Washington, D.C. And about a month ago, we moved up to New Jersey to my in-laws' house. They have since moved to Texas. And so it was kind of sitting idle. They were trying to sell it. And we're very lucky that they haven't been able to. So we're back in my husband's childhood home. And it hits, to give you an idea how rural it is, leaving D.C. to how rural it is, a black bear walked across our front yard yesterday into the woods.
Where are you?
We're in New Jersey. We're in the garden part of New Jersey right now. And It's as garden as it gets because the week before we looked up and there was a bald eagle with a fish in its talons. So we're as
you're like in the pine, you're in the Pine Barrens maybe, where like the Jersey Devil lives. Yeah. Okay, good.
Which is absolutely gorgeous. And so we are social distancing and I have two little ones, a 6 and a 7-year-old. And we had to leave DC in part because they were not going outside. And my son was turning like this little murky, transparent blue-green. And I was like, that's not healthy. So we're lucky to be here.
You are. I am from Jersey, full disclosure. So I would ask you what exit, but it sounds like you might be off the turnpike. I'm not really sure.
We're way up. Morristown, I think, is the closest. We're by Newton in Sparta.
Fantastic.
I think it's population 100 if on a good day where I am. And I don't think that's actually that. And there's only one stoplight and a gas station. And the gas station is the Central Plaza.
So there's 100 people and 200 black bears. Got it.
Probably. I would like not to know the ratio, to be honest.
Okay, please stay safe. So you're in Jersey right now. You've been living in DC, but originally, tell me about your origins, your upbringing, and where's your family originally from?
Yeah, so I was fortunate. I was born in Bogota, Colombia. My mom is from Cartagena, Colombia, and we have. This is going to sound. My mother was a single mom, and my mom met my dad when I was 1 year old, and he was the only dad I ever knew, and he was from Geyserville, California. It's almost as if my husband and I both grew up in very rural areas. My mother grew up in Cartagena in Bogota, which was, in Bogota is like New York City, like 6 million people. And my father sadly got very ill shortly after they got married. And so we moved to Geyserville because he was going to convalesce. Geyserville on a good day had 300 people. So it was like, I don't know, times of tragedy. I'm attracted to very rural areas.
I was going to say, okay, please continue.
So I grew up and it was this kind of a strange experience. I feel like I've been translating all my life because when my dad got really sick, we went back to my grandparents. They were grape growers, not fancy. They were grape growers. They were farmers. And their whole experience interacting with Latinos were basically, they were the landowners and the brown people worked the field. So as my dad was getting convalesced, my grandmother took care of me and they sent my mother to pick grapes. And you can imagine that dynamic during Thanksgiving. It was a strange one, and then during the summer, my mother would ship me back to Colombia. So I grew up in these two different worlds where in the US, I was Latina, mostly identified as Mexican because that's all everyone knew, including myself. And then in Colombia, I was known as La Gringa. So, and then if I was in Bogota, I was the black gringa, and in Cartagena, I was the exotic gringa, because my family is Afro-Caribbean, is Afro-Latina. So just
Wow. A woman
there's
of
a lot.
Places. Yes. Okay. But this all turned you into who you are today.
And I think it actually allowed me to see this different dynamic that it really depends on where you're sitting. And it has everything to do with where you're sitting and how your resilience comes from not how other people perceive you, but how you perceive yourself and the spaces that you should occupy. And because I grew up in these two dualities, things were always being imposed on me, and I had to constantly be able to recognize what was it that they were seeing versus who I was. And I thank my mother for that, because she would always say that everyone carries into a room their experience, but that doesn't mean that it's yours.
Yeah, so interesting, your background. Okay, so that's your family foundation, and tell me how that eventually led you into activism, politics. How did it put you on the road you're on today?
I am an accidental advocate. I have to say, though, I have always, because my mom was a single mom in Colombia, because she was from Cartagena, which is Afro-Caribbean, and because of all the layers of prejudice that do exist in Colombia, I always had this acute understanding that had my mom stayed a single mom in Colombia, my life was already defined. It was predetermined by where I was born. And when I came to the United States, even though my mother was struggling with the prejudice of what was happening inside our home, I would go to school and I had books and I had learning, and I was excited because all of a sudden I was learning how to play basketball and I was having a very American experience. And so when I was in third grade, I remember coming back to school. I went to a Catholic school and raising my hand, and the teacher was asking what we were thankful for. And David, I was thankful because I had just become a US citizen the day before. I remember very clearly being in San Francisco City Hall and holding my mom's hand and raising my hand to pledge allegiance to a country that promised me everything and that had not defined me quite yet. And I guess that was the beginning of it, right? It was the beginning of my activism. And then when I was in fifth grade, I came home crying, and my father asked me why I was crying, and it was because I found out that I couldn't be president because I was naturalized.
Yeah,
I could tell my dad was like, who is this kid? But I realized the reason I was crying was because all of a sudden, it was the first time the country had broken her contract with me. Right. And all of a sudden she had told me that I could be anyone. And then she had actually defined what I could not be. And so I carried that with me. But really, I started doing more politics when I was in college and high school. And it was just seeing the differences and the disparities in the Latino community and elsewhere. I didn't see someone wearing a suit, David, until I was until I did an internship. I was 21 years old. I did an internship in college, and it was the first time I saw an African American and a Latino wearing a suit.
Interesting.
And it was one of these like, wow, like these, and it's all these inputs that you have that when you're raised, especially in a rural area, and because our history is lacking in history books, we don't actually, you have all these inputs, but you don't have the language to explain or understand what you're witnessing. And so later, shortly after my internship, I ended up working for a member of Congress, and I would see all these people who were really well-intentioned trying to write policy for the more marginalized around us, but they had no clue. Because most of my fellow staffers, their parents had given big checks to that said congressperson. So it wasn't necessarily merit-based. And they were just writing policy based on their own experience. And that's one of the reasons why I was always active, because while I was the first in the family to go to college, the first one to go to graduate from Harvard, the first of everything, I would call back home, and even though I grew up in a very rural area called Sonoma, California, it wasn't the fancy part, my cousins had been trapped, and it fell very much on gender lines. All the young women in my family, I was the eldest of my cousins, all the young women were thriving. They were all in school, and all the young men were not. They were really struggling. And everything that you hear about that happens in a densely urban area to Black and brown folks was happening in Sonoma, California, the bastion of liberalism. And again, didn't have language for it, right? But knew that something was weird, because why are the young women in my family thriving and why are the young men struggling so much? And some of it was that they were trapped at a very young age. I don't know a man in my family who was not racially profiled by a police officer. I don't know. And so all of that fed into why I do what I do, because I believe in America, but I also believe that she has yet to fulfill her promise. And it means that to fulfill her promise, we must participate.
Absolutely. Just really curious, I'm a BU graduate. What year did you graduate Harvard?
I went to the Kennedy School, and I graduated in 2001.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
Got
yeah,
it.
yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Go Harvard. Go Crimson.
That was a hard experience. I mean, I grew
Yeah.
up in California, and technically, you know, everybody says Harvard was the Berkeley of California. No, it wasn't. It was like, no, when I was there, I was just like,
That's amazing. I
yeah.
didn't know you went to Harvard. That's cool. All right. So, which leads us to Voto Latino. Talk about the birth of Voto Latino. We were talking a little bit beforehand. It started, I think you said, as a PSA. Give us a sense of how this started, why it started, and what it's turned into.
You know, this is what's really interesting. You know, you put something out in the universe, and then the gods align it, and you're like, you meet the right people, and your journey. Sometimes you jump for that journey. It actually happens. So, it was curious. About 2 years prior, I had been telling my mentor that I really wanted to work in the Latino community, and for me, had everything to do with 9/11. I happened to be in New York during 9/11. My job was about to go into international affairs and travel the globe as a consultant. And I always thought that that's where I was going to be. And then I had a come to Jesus moment when 9/11 happened. I was in ground zero and I witnessed so much. And I had kind of this moment of, I'm about to, as a first generation immigrant with a lot of familial responsibility, with a lot of student debt, I was about to go on a journey that was fulfilling my mother's promise, what she expected and what she wanted. Mm-hmm. And so I took a moment, I was able to take a moment and say, well, that's actually not how I want to live my life. I actually want to give back to my community. I felt that I had already worked in Congress. I had already worked some in the private sector, and I had gone to the Kennedy School. I felt like I had this knowledge that had my cousins and my aunts and my uncles and my mom had it sooner, we could have navigated the country differently and the world around us differently. And so that was the conversation I was having with my mentor. And 2 years later, he happened to sit next to Rosario Dawson at a dinner. And she had just finished a series of public service announcements with this man named Phil Colon. And it was a
I know Phil. I know Phil.
It was a partnership with Phil Colon. And it was a partnership with MTV. And it was a PSA campaign. And John Leguizamo was one of the first. Zoe Saldana was on there, you know, Jayla, like all the greats, right? Where they lent their name. And it was because it was going to be it was the beginning of a tsunami of young Latinos coming of age. Today, as we speak, you know this, every 30 seconds, a young Latino comes of age. That's power. And they were reading the same tea leaves as I was, right? It was right after the census came out, and we learned that between 2000 and the previous decade, we had just learned that close to 49% of births had come from Latino families, and that was just going to continue to skyrocket. Make a long story short, I met Rosario at TRL on election day, and I think she was vetting me, and I was trying to figure out, well, is there anything? But as I get into the car to go see her, I was going to go take a cab. As I get to take a cab, I remember I was in my apartment because I was living in New York, and I remember turning on MTV. I was like, well, I wonder if this is anything. And I see John telling me to care about my parents' Social Security, and I see Tego Calderon telling me register to vote because I can't. And I loved it because the white kid in Kansas just loved Tego Calderon at the time. And Tego was speaking to me in code because I knew why people couldn't register and why they couldn't vote, right? And that just spoke to me. And the Voto Latino PSA, it was the first time, I had already been political, right? I was already politicized. I had already worked in Congress. I'd gone to the Kennedy School of Government. It was the first time, David, that I ever heard someone say what I always felt inside. And that was, I was American. And I was like, this is something. And that's so, you know, so I had, you know, I basically, Rosario was very straight with me. She's like, there's no funding for this, meaning there's no salary. This is a PSAs and a name and a website. Are you interested? I said, how hard can this be?
Kudos to you.
And so I quit my job. I gave up I broke my lease. I packed my bags. And by March, I was living in my mom's home in Sonoma. And for the first 3 years, David, Voto Latino was literally on my credit card. But I ended up in Silicon Valley, in the backyard of Silicon Valley, right when people were starting to immerse. And some of the great minds that we have today actually had a chance to look at our business plan and they were all out of work or struggling to meet their own, they're all startups. And so they gave me the time of day, and it made us better. And it gave us, a leap forward. I mean, we were trying to do with what you were doing when you first started your career, right? We were trying to revolutionize how people talk to Latinos, recognizing, hey, it's a young group. They have incredible influence in their families. And hey guys, they adopt technology. And more importantly, they speak English. Right. I mean, remember like that 15 years ago, we would like tell someone, and I would have even Latino leadership in Washington, D.C. saying that I was wasting my time. And I was like, maybe, but my experience is so vastly different because I see all my cousins. I mean, I'm one of 15 just in this country. Right. And they all speak English. Right. Like, and they're all navigating the country. I was like, there's millions of us according to the census. Like this must be bigger.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Wow. What a journey you've been on. And so just give us a sense of today, the Latinx voter bloc. I think the number I saw was like 32 million voters, potential voters. Give us a sense of the profile of the Latinx voter bloc, Democrat, Republican, Independent, first generation. What do you know about this group?
That's for books. I don't want to bore your audience, but it's the biggest potential. For the very first time, we're going to be the second largest group of Americans that are eligible to vote. Every single election, we keep saying that it's a sleeping giant. I keep saying that we're awakened and we're woke. And while 16 million of us are registered, 79% of us vote. That's huge. Our biggest challenge, our biggest gap is the voter registration gap among 33 years old and younger. So we have roughly, of the 15 million that are unregistered, roughly 10 million of them are under the age of 33. 4 million of those 10 are eligible to cast a ballot for the first time this election. When elections are, in some cases, literally decided by a coin toss.
It's power. Wow.
Right? And that's when people are saying, well, my vote doesn't matter. It's like, Marco Rubio, the best story I always have is with Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio, I was talking to the mayor of Miami-Dade about 6 years ago. And this guy was like, this guy ran a special election. He lost by less than 63 points. And I'm like, oh, that's a shame. He's like, yeah, you should ask him who he ran against in the special election. I said, well, who? He's like, it was Marco Rubio. 63 votes. I mean, we're Latino. We know 63 people. I
think you said I have 63 cousins.
Yeah, I know. That's like your las tías, anyway, so
yes.
So we take for granted how close the elections are, and people make it hard sometimes, make it seem like it's hard for us to vote because they know that that's where the power lies. David, a lot of times people say, well, the system is rigged. I said, no, the system works exactly as it's supposed to for whoever occupies the institution. We may not like what's happening right now at the White House, but it's functioning just as the people who voted him into power requested. Our job, and we know though that when we mobilize, great things happen. In this past midterm election, it was the largest participation in 100 years by voters, and young voters and young Latinos came out in force. It was the first time that generation X, Y, and Z out-registered and out-voted their baby boomers.
Why? What's the formula there? What changed?
I think that the person in the White House is someone that people feel, rightfully so, is a clear and present danger. And I say this because I've never used that terminology, but now we have someone at the White House who says it's safe to ingest Lysol. It is not safe to ingest Lysol. Sadly, people have actually. Lysol said it was not safe to ingest Lysol. I don't know. I felt bad for that CEO and that person writing that press release for Lysol, saying, "Do I really have to write this?"
Hold on, Maria Teresa. Funny enough, John Leguizamo, my friend and colleague, posted something about that on Instagram. Did a really funny thing. I think he was ingesting Raid, and he's knocking at the door right now. Let me see.
No, he's not.
I think this could be him. Hold on. Let me see if he's here. Hold on. Let me see if he joins.
Oh my gosh! Look at that.
Is this happening? Is this really happening? He's. I think it's Jay Legs. This better be John Leguizamo. You better figure out how to work Zoom.
¿Cómo estás? He's frozen.
This is such a pleasant surprise. I don't see him yet, but hopefully.
Jay Legs. Oh, that's his picture.
That's his little, yeah,
You're
that's his little
connected to
icon.
audio. ¿A dónde estás, papi?
Here, while he's joining, so finish that. We'll see. Hopefully he'll join us. He'll figure out how to use Zoom in a minute. But tell me about some of the barriers to entry. Like what is sort of the biggest challenge you have educating voters, Latinx voters?
The number one barrier is no one asks the Latino community to participate, and then they expect us to wake up one day and say, my life is really hard, so I'm going to register to vote. And Voto Latino, from very early on, we learned that if you ask someone to register, the Latino community is hungering to be recognized, right? We are a hardworking people, and I don't say this lightly, but we are technically we're the 11th largest economy in the world. We manage $1.7 trillion of purchasing power, and we're constantly taken for granted. Hey, John!
Oh, here he is.
How's it going?
The internets. You figured out the internets, John. Welcome.
It took me a long time to figure out the las redes.
Las redes, ¿cómo estás? ¿A dónde estás?
Good to see you. Estoy en Nueva York, in the Hamptons. By the
Really nice.
Sequestering, isolating, quarantining, whatever you call it. Staying away from everyone, wearing masks, doing the whole thing.
I'm proud. That's really good. That's hard.
That's fogged up. Yeah. What's up? So good to see you.
It's wonderful to see you. It's really wonderful to see you. Yeah, I was just telling them that you were one of the original Voto Latino gangsters. You did our stuff before anybody.
I am.
You are.
I'm an OG.
You're an OG.
It's great. It's great to have you.
I don't think I told you. I don't think I told you, but right before I went to go meet Rosario about what we could do with this, you and Tego Calderon, you guys were the ones that convinced me that this was the right thing for me. It's like, yeah, let's do it.
Oh, I'm glad.
Oh,
Who knew? Yeah, I mean, I've always had huge respect for you. I mean, the way you put Latin people forward and you deal with the political aspects of and ramifications of being Latin in this country. I mean, it's beautiful how you stand up for us.
Yeah, well, the work that you're doing and telling us our stories, that's what I was telling Dave, when I started this journey, I didn't even have language for the institutional structural racism that was happening in my family. I just didn't have the language because it was never taught to us. We didn't have, and you're giving a generation a foundation so that we have a touch point of, one, when things are not okay, but also the incredible roots and how prideful we should be for being Latino in this country and what we've done and accomplished. So,
I mean, because being Latin is like having a superpower. I mean,
it is.
We had the greatest empires in the world. The Aztecs, the Incas, the Mayas, they were genocided, destroyed. Our religion, our culture, and our language was taken from us. And then we go into oppression for like another 500 years of slavery, lynchings, being stoned to death. And yet we're still contributing $2.3 trillion to the U.S. economy.
Right.
Latin women are number one in small jobs creations. We saved the housing market at 68%.
Yep. It's all of it.
We're unstoppable.
We're unstoppable. Well, and now that's why, and I mean, everybody's like, well, people make it hard to vote. And like, they make it hard to vote because they know that they see our power, and it's a time for us to like turn that mirror and see our power in our reflection.
Right.
And that is why.
Absolutely. Because we're 32 million registered voters. We are the largest voting bloc in America outside of white people. And you have to contend to us. You have to talk to us. You have to cater to us. You can't ignore us anymore. Otherwise, you don't get our vote.
That's right. That's right. And we also have to make sure that we're making, I keep telling people like, well, it doesn't matter if I vote in November. I was like, no, there's no plan B, because what's happening right now in the Latino community, like COVID has basically demonstrated Latinos, we are at the front lines. We are the essential workers. We are the economic engines. And 20% of us were left out of the CARES Act. That's obscene. Right. And it was either because we were married to an undocumented person or we were undocumented. That's obscene because it's a different form of enslavement when you do that, when you do not want to recognize people's actual charge of fair wages, their worth and all of, I mean, it's shocking. Yeah, it's really, really shocking.
Because you're so right. I mean, Latin people and Black people have been at the forefront. They're the first responders. They're care workers. They're essential workers. They're all growing the food that we eat. making the food that we eat, serving the food that we eat, and then not talk about all the other countless things that we need to survive. They're doing that so we can sequester at home.
Exactly.
While they put their lives on the line for us to feel comfortable and to be able to stay at home and have a, you know,
have these conversations, right? No, it's, you know, someone the other day, I got so upset because it's hard for me to get upset, but I was absolutely livid because the president right now is trying to cut farm worker wages from $7 an hour to $5 an hour. I was like, this is the same guy that actually, these individuals that are working the field are not only sacrificing their life, but they're literally putting his food on his table.
Right. And you know, he takes up a lot of food. He's morbidly obese.
I might have heard that on television the other day.
Nancy was
I love Nancy. I love me some Pelosi. Oh my God, I love her.
Wonderful. She really is. But you know, it was interesting because there was a lot of people that got upset by that. And it was interesting because I don't know how it was growing up in your family, John, but in my family, we would tease each other with what our deficiencies were, right? So I was, you know, I had labios and I had a nose.
Right.
And so the moment that I walked out, when a kid tried to tease me about it, I'm like, yes. But I realized
true. Latin people take like your worst qualities and they make it a loving thing. Like my aunt, who's really dark skinned, La Negrita, the one that was very Indian looking, La Indiecita. You know, I was del feito.
Yeah,
you know?
It's the traits, right? No, but it's the traits. But I realized that it's our parents' way of also creating us into Teflon. Right? And so when people were saying that wasn't nice what she said, I said, well, had you grown up in this Latin culture, people would have been like,
yeah, right.
It's not true.
By my parents who love me.
Right.
So what are you that mean nothing, saying that means absolutely nothing.
Yeah. No, it's funny. I actually had this conversation with my daughter because my daughter came home one day and she's 7 and she was upset. I was like, what's wrong? She's like, you know, this little girl, Sage, she's telling me I'm short. I said, I'm the shortest girl in the class. I said, well, are you? She's like, yes. I was like, well, you are then. There's like nothing you can do about it.
Right.
But it's an empowerment, right? Because then someone can't use it against you. And I do think that our families use it because we know that the world can be cruel and kids could be cruel. And it gives us a Teflon moment. When someone says, eres orejona. Sí lo soy.
It must have come from the conquest. I mean, because all the demeaning terminology that was used against us, we had to own it somehow. You know what I mean? And own it and turn it around.
Because you're right, because the Spaniards don't do that. It's not a Spaniard.
No, it's not a Spaniard. It's a thing of conquest where they come in and they make you feel less than, and then you have to like somehow own it. Own your less than-ness.
Yeah. I think you're right. Make it something. Make it a shield. Strange. But los colombianos, everything is like left and right? You know, el orejón, all of it.
El narizón, el orejón, el barrigón.
Todo. No, but I wonder if that's what it is.
El gordo, la flaca.
I mean, they did a whole TV show on that, right? Like,
they did.
I mean, you can never do it in the U.S. The skinny and the fat one. I mean, that doesn't fly.
That wouldn't fly. No, everybody would be offended. But I do think it's a way of our parents. I mean, maybe it does come from the conquistadores of giving us Teflon, of making sure that people could not go to that route, because that way we could
turn into a shield of sorts of protection, Captain America shield.
Yeah, that's right. Because we're superheroes.
Yeah.
John might have a superhero thing coming out, right, John?
Can't tell me.
Oh, I'm hoping. Well, you know, we've been working on it for years. It's called Phenom X and the Uncontrollables. You know, we have this great comic book. The third largest comic book company, Image Comics, is distributing it. And I raised all the money on crowdfunder. People really helped me.
That's awesome.
And I'm really happy that they were able to contribute in creating Latin product. You know, I think I want to do more of that. You know, Latin people creating our own products, our own production lines, our own industries.
Well, controlling our story, right? I mean,
exactly.
Because our stories aren't being told. I mean, we're less than 4% of the faces in front of the camera, but we're less than 1% of the story.
Right.
No storylines, no executives. And that's where the real sadness is, because at least if they're telling our stories, we'll see ourselves somehow. But they're not even telling our stories.
But they're
and we're
expecting it.
a quarter of the U.S. box office.
Yeah, but they're expecting it, right. But we are underwriting Hollywood because
Yes.
we're the ones that are actually going to fill theaters and stuff. So no, I think the work that you're doing is really important.
So
but we have to change it. Yeah, tell me.
Sorry to interrupt.
We left David.
Sorry
David who?
This is my show, damn it.
Yeah. Claim it, David.
No, before you joined, John, Maria Teresa was talking about the midterms and how Latinx community came out in droves of all ages and talk about taking control of the narrative. There's no more power than in voting and obviously, electing people who are of our choice. Maria Teresa, talk about that. And then John, I know you were very involved in this. I'd love to just sort of connect the dots on that conversation.
Well, every 30 seconds, a Latino turns 18 years old. And when people say, well, is Voto Latino surprised by the moment? No, that's one of the reasons why we started. We read the tea leaves. I just wish the Democratic Party had as well, because the Republicans did. And I say this because the Republicans gutted the Voting Rights Act because Shelby County represented 100% increase in the Latino population. And every single jurisdiction that followed that basically removed protection for voting had at least a 60% increase in Latino voting potential. So they were preparing for this moment where all of a sudden a tsunami of Latinos were going to come of age, and they're like not on our watch. And so our job at Voto Latino is to register the heck out of voters. We have registered to date, as of today, for this election cycle, we have registered 111,000 registered voters.
Woo! Beautiful.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, and to give your listeners an idea, in the last election, first of all, we're the leading voter registration organization, not by a little, but by a lot. But in the last election, even though we were the leading organization, we had registered less than 1,200. So we're on a path to register over 500,000 and to mobilize 12 million in the states that really matter. Texas, as you know, John, I'm like a dog of bone. It's huge opportunity. Florida, I still hope and pray for Florida, but then we also have Arizona, North Carolina.
We might have to give up on Florida, but we haven't given up yet.
I know. It's
hard to believe that Florida flips sometimes red. You can't believe it because everybody's Jewish and Latin. How can you be Republican? How can you vote for a Republican? But who knows?
I don't know. You're seeing a lot. Well, in Florida, what you see is that you see a lot of Republicans from the Midwest who leave, and they immediately know how to register, and they immediately and they like free tax. They like to be taxed in a taxless state.
State taxless states.
Thank you. Say that 50 times. I'd be terrible. But but for us, it's all, as you guys know, it's all about using culture and talking and meeting people where they are, because people will say, well, why aren't Latinos voting? It's like, because we don't meet them where they are.
Yep.
But you do that on conservative radio. You go, you look for your voters there. You actually do the outreach when it is a non-Latino voter. So why should we expect anything less? And so for Voto Latino, we meet our audience where we are because we recognize that political empowerment is a game changer. It is the one that decides who. I was talking to David. It's like, everybody says that the system is rigged. And I said, no, the system works as it should for the people who occupy it. Let's occupy it.
Yep. Occupy the space. AOC proved it. She knew she couldn't get that nomination without going to every door, stomping, knocking on doors, calling, doing stomp speeches. Right. She knew it. She did it, and she talked and reached out to the Latin community and all the other communities in her district, and she won. And then Beto said the same thing. In Texas, the way you flip it, go to those doors, talk to those people. Latin people are incredibly loyal. Once you talk to us and you tell us that we matter and that you care about us, then we're yours. Right.
And we want respect, right? It's not, this is where it gets irritating when people say, well, why do you guys want something different? It's like, no, we want the respect because it's not that we deserve it. It's that we've earned it. Our families have earned it. And we have sacrificed, in many cases, the ultimate sacrifice with giving up our loved ones, whether it's been to war or to others. And yet somehow under this administration, they try to make us other. They try to make us less American. For the very first time, there's 1 out of every 10 voters are going to be naturalized citizens that are eligible to vote. This president knows this. So 8 months ago, he set up the denaturalization task force under the Department of Justice. I'm a naturalized citizen.
How disgusting.
Yeah, disgusting, because we have never taken away citizenship to someone unless
of any group, of any group,
even in our
Poles,
darkest times.
Yeah, Australians, whoever you are, English, we've never taken away their naturalization, but you're going to do it to Latin people who have been here for 500 years and before, who fought in the American Revolution, the Civil War, are the most decorated minority in every war America has had, and you're going to pay us back by denaturalizing us. That's crazy. That's so.
Well, it's sloppy. It's also sloppy because, I mean, one of the things that Americans, we've always said that we have grit and we like to compete and we like to fight for things, right? But we have a whole party that doesn't want to fight for our vote. They just want to eliminate the vote. That's just sloppy. That's lazy. And that's holding back a future, because I look at my kids and the future's born, right? My kids are 6 and 7 years old. They represent the majority minority country that we have to prepare for, so that they are able to actually walk into any room and be judged by their character and not because of their ethnicity. And that is what we work on every single day at Voto Latino, is like, how do we have true political enfranchisement so we are not only informing policy, but we're actually driving the car. We are the future. We're here. We're born.
I mean, you meet so many great young Latin people who are aspiring and at Columbia University, being lawyers, doctors. I mean, it's an incredible generation, Latinx, and you have to respect them. And we have to, being the elders, we have to protect them and make sure that path is cleared so they can achieve more than we achieved.
Absolutely. Yeah, no. And it's funny because sometimes, people say, well, I can't believe you said that. I said, well, we have nothing to lose because everything right now is on the table. And if we don't speak truth to power, folks are going to grow up like me who understood something was off, but did not have the language. Right. And if you don't have the language, you can't address it. And
I have a question, Maria Teresa. And when John, you started saying get out the vote to the Latinx community, however many decades ago at this point, this was a bipartisan message, right? It was just everybody vote, use your power.
Right.
But now, as I was on Voto Latino's website, there's an official endorsement for a candidate that Trump is referred to as an existential threat to the future of the Latinx community. Yep. How do you navigate that? And when did you finally say, we got to take a stand on this and no more bipartisan? This is real.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you asked, because it was a really hard decision. I think right after the moment that Donald Trump descended those escalators, we knew to take him seriously. And he decided that he was going to create his whole candidacy on the backs of Latinos. Voto Latino, we've galvanized a group of close to over 500 individuals. They jumped on a plane and we went to the very first internment camp. Ocasio-Cortez joined us. We had Dolores Huerta, Kerry Kennedy. We had we got MSNBC to agree to do a 3-hour special because we were living under encampments of children in 2019. Like
separating children. 20,000 children have not been returned to their parents.
Right.
And that's a massive amount of children that have been, separated from the loved ones. It's inhumane.
It's inhumane. And it drove this understanding that he sees us as a piece of labor, a piece of stock, as one of his advisors said yesterday. We are nothing more but a means of actually having an economic engine for his hotels and for his golf courses and stuff. And I went to some of those shelters and I talked to some of those children, to some of those mothers and loved ones. And it was heart-wrenching and for me, it was, you're targeting the most vulnerable among us who are desperately wanting the American dream. But at the same time, that if we give them a shot, they're the ones that revitalize us. They're the ones that keep this experiment of America going, and we're shutting it out. And so
they run the engine. They run the engine.
But they also carry the myth to their children that this is the best damn country in the world, right? And this is so we're cutting our future off. And so that's when we had serious conversations with our board and saying we want to endorse. So January 1st of this year, Voto Latino, all of our external communications became C4. Because I want to make sure that there's no doubt.
They became what? C4?
Became a C4, meaning that we were going to endorse and that we're going. So we have one arm of us, that's Voto Latino Foundation, that does all of our voter registration. That's all C3. That's all we do, C3 voter registration. So for folks that want to participate with us, it's all C3. And then there's a C4 arm, though, that we are speaking truth. Ya no tenemos pelo en la boca. We're saying, look, this is exactly what this president, I mean, the fact that who would conceive a denaturalization task force? Who would conceive of that? When we have
to take it away from people, for you profile them, you create small little ridiculous crimes to disenfranchise them, and then put them in determined camps where Jeff Beauregard Sessions III makes a profit.
Right. I mean, we've seen this. I mean, we've lived this script before. There's no reason to pretend that our institutions are strong enough to weather them if he's going after the very institutions that are meant to protect us. And so that is why we endorse David, because our audience, one, trusts us. They know that we've always been very straightforward to them. They know that we've never endorsed a political candidate. It's ours sounding the alarm that what is happening is not okay, it's not right, and that our country is in, it's fragile. It's like any relationship. If we don't nurture it, if you don't go out and vote, if you don't hold your elected accountable, people will do as they will. But if we shine a really strong light of what is happening and we nurture that relationship, our country has a pretty damn great blueprint to be exceptional. And we haven't achieved it, but we have a generation of young people who are taking those reins. They're running for office. Our midterm election had the largest participation in our nation's history, and that turned into our most diverse Congress, and that turned into 400 pieces of legislation that speak to our values, that talks about background checks, that talks about the environment, that talks about dreamers, that talks about citizenship. I mean, you go under these 400, when people say, well, my vote doesn't matter, it's like, there's 400 pieces of legislation that speaks to the future that the majority of Americans want. We need to finish the job. And that job finishes through the Latino community. And I will be very frank and very clear. And I want him to know our name. I want him to know that the people that actually took him out of power was Voto Latino and our allies, because what he has been doing to our community has not only been disrespectful, but it is criminalizing a generation. I gave a speech in November to mental health professionals in Texas that take care of young kids from pre-K all the way through high school. Latinos' number one concern in the Latino community of health for their children was mental health. These therapists were saying that they were seeing depression and anxiety among 3-year-olds. Wow. Shame on him. Shame on him. Because of what I extrapolate from that is that these children are hearing their parents saying, am I going to get deported? Are we going to have to, they're hearing conversations that a 3-year-old should not have to be privy to, but because they have real anxiety.
So true. I'll never forget a few years ago when he was talking about Rocket Man, how my son called me up and he was crying. He's like, Rocket Man's going to get us. World War III. It's just unbelievable. You don't know. These kids are listening. It's
right.
Telling me.
Yeah.
But
I mean, the hate that he promotes, I mean, he feeds off hate. He's a hate monger. I mean, hate crimes are up for Latin people, for Muslim people, for Black people, for Asians, for Jewish people. I mean, he just lives off that hate. He's like a villain from a comic book, Apocalypse or something.
Well, I keep saying that usually when the leader's a moron, it's usually a spoof.
Right. But he's a dangerous moron. That's the problem.
He's not a moron. And people are saying, well, what he's doing is lack of experience. I said, no, it's malpractice. Because he is endangering people. Like I've shared, the fact that he's telling people to ingest Lysol because of COVID, that's malpractice. That's malpractice.
To stand up to your governor with arms. I mean, what is that? I mean, what president? It's like he's inciting like a secession. It's crazy.
Well,
it's terrorist talk.
It's deflecting. Well, it's deflection, right? Because the reason if you were to ask me like, why is he doing this, is because he is raiding our coffers. He is acting more as an authoritarian of a banana republic. And so while we're looking over here as he incites this race violence intentions, he's stealing.
Distraction.
He's getting money from emoluments. He's getting Russian money, Saudi Arabia money.
Now, this got really deep, you guys.
It is. And now look.
All
right, let me just go back something, because this is kind of cool. So I don't know, it was a couple months ago, John was telling me, he's like, you got to check out this Voto Latino app. I think it's called Voter Pal, if I'm not mistaken, and talk about an easy way to get younger people involved and signed up and registered to vote. talk about this app. John was super energized about it, and I was going to talk to you about it today. So funny, John is here.
Yeah, so we actually, we created it with this idea that if we scan people's driver's license, all of a sudden you turn everybody into someone that can register to vote. And it was, quite frankly, with the intention of surpassing these really hard laws that we see in Texas and Georgia. And it was designed, though, with the idea that if everybody can register, it has a little ticker and it's super easy, and it takes the onus out of an organization. I think the challenge with voter registration is that all these organizations, we have to meet goals, and then all of a sudden, but we have limited bandwidth. But if you all of a sudden empower a young person or anyone to start registering their friends and family, those are millions of organizers at our disposal. And it was actually named by the App Store as one of the top 4 political apps for ease of use. And
congratulations.
It was, thank you. And it was, 20% of our registered voters was done by them. So technically,
but I would have thought.
Yeah, so by technically we're registering folks at less than $3 a pop. That's really inexpensive, right? And the more people that use it, the cost actually starts going down. So I know that we're in the age of COVID, but if you guys talk about downloading VoterPal and you are in lockdown with, your loved ones, make sure that they're registered, and it's super easy, and you'll actually be able to see how many people you're registering at the same time. Yeah, beautiful. And we'll take care of the rest. We'll remind you what your voting place is. We'll make sure that you're doing a mail-in ballot. We have a partnership with Lyft. Lyft will pick you up to go to the polls. We spoon feed it for you guys. So you can't tell me that you can't do it.
Voter Pal, you heard it here.
Yeah, Voter Pal, especially because in Texas, it's a felony to register people if you're not deputized.
That's right.
And the deputizing office is open like once a year. And you're only allowed.
It might as well be. Yeah, it might as well be.
And you're only allowed to deputize in the tiniest district. And if you register people outside of your district, it's a felony. Yep. So they're making it impossible for you to register people to vote, because they know they don't want all the people to vote. They just want certain people to vote.
That's right. That's right. And so we actually developed it with our attorneys and with Small Planet. So Small Planet focuses on creating apps for teens and for Planned Parenthood. So it's really easy to use, but then our attorneys made sure that Texans can use it, because we want to make sure that we are cracking the code. Look, and it goes back to this whole thing. Politics should be about a battle of ideas.
Yeah,
and you should be not money. And it should be a battle of ideas. And and you should be working so hard for the Latino community's vote, because as you said, we are artists, but we're also business people, and we're scientists. We fall along the line of all of these different, we're multi-issued interests, but instead
not monolithic.
We're not monolithic. And thank you for the language. Really. But then we have one party that, instead of competing for it, they blanketly are ostracizing and moving us away. We're technically under George Bush, we should be at play. And that's healthy politics, right? Like when you are playing for people, the best ideas come to surface.
Competing for ideas as opposed to just annihilating a whole group of people from voting.
Right. Yeah.
You don't have to cater to them. You have to talk to them. You just gerrymander them out of power and out of money and funds for their schools. Right. You'd get Betsy DeVos to destroy the whole public school system and give the money Congress just gave just to vouchers and charter schools, and forget everybody else, educate yourselves. You find all these ways to destroy and keep people down so they don't have the opportunity to vote against you.
Right. Well,
instead of challenging, coming up with a better plan, and like you said, a better ideology.
Right. And it's interesting, right? Because we live in a capitalist society where the marketplace is supposed to surface the best candidates, but the way the system right now is set up, and because they are not competing for a marketplace of ideas, we are marginalizing the second largest group of Americans that we've ever seen walk our country. And they're disproportionately young, and they're disproportionately young people of color. And so they're purposely trying to make sure that we turn off so that they can concentrate power among a few. And that is what we get up every morning at Voto Latino to fight against, because we know that our strength is in our power and in our ability to not just work for someone else, but to be able to self-define ourselves.
Absolutely. You have another very important initiative you touched upon earlier, Maria Teresa, called Immigrant.
Hey, sorry, guys, I got to jump out because I got to go buy some masks before the store closes. Love you, Maria. Keep
I love you. Bye-bye. Chao. Hasta luego. Ciao. Gracias.
Abrazo.
Ciao, mi amor. Bye-bye.
Okay. Ciao. Thanks for being here. Wow, that was amazing.
He was great. It's always fun to see him.
I have a million questions. I know we only have a few more minutes here, but I did want to ask you about this Immigrant Neighbor Fund. I was created by Voto Latino Foundation in partnership with Mission Asset Fund and the APIA Vote. This is in response to America's gross inequities and injustices that have been front and center during the COVID-19 crisis, affecting Latinos and others who have been left out of the CARES Act financially. And something like 20% of Latinx workers have been left out. Yep. So this provides financial support. Would love you to tell us more about that and how people can get involved in this.
Yeah, so there's a common thing about what makes me work is that if I see a problem, I was like, well, how do we fix it? How do we address it? And how do we elevate it so that we're talking about it, so that people see it? So it was born out of this idea that 20% of the Latinx community was left out of the CARES Act, either because they were married to an undocumented person, or their parents were undocumented, or they were undocumented themselves, and 1.7 million Asian immigrants were also left out. And we reached out to API Vote because we also felt that it was a moment of solidarity among these two communities that have been single-handedly carrying the brunt a lot of the hate speech that's been happening, but also are bearing a lot of the brunt of the labor and the essential worker on the front lines. A lot of Asian individuals are very much taking care of our elderly. They're CNAs, they're nurses, they are healthcare workers. And so we partner with them in Mission Asset Fund. And what I loved about this is that I started calling around trying to see who can we partner with, because we wanted to make sure like this is not a core of our work. And so we partnered with Mission Asset Fund because all of the organizations together, we all agreed that 100% of the proceeds were going to go back into the pockets of people. And for us, that was really important. There was no overhead. We all worked, Mission Asset Fund is now taking the majority of it, but Mission Asset Fund has a system in place that basically is able to identify people when they apply, whether or not they're eligible. And the money goes directly into the person's bank account. So $500, we are able to disperse it chunks of $500. But if you're a family of four and you all qualify, that's $2,000. We have over 17,000 people who have applied already. We've raised $1.1 million.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And that was with a seed grant from East West Bank community. So if there are other, corporates that want to do matching, we welcome it. Like I said, we've vetted our partners and we vet the individuals that receive it. And the best part of it is that we know that it's going for food, it's going for medicine, it's going for rent. Things that oftentimes we take for granted. $500 for a family goes a really long way. And more importantly, we're giving them back the dignity that they deserve. We are honoring our neighbors in a time of crisis, when that is one of the things that has always made America special, is that we've always stepped up for our neighbors. And that's why we call it the Immigrant Neighbor Fund. And
Absolutely.
So if folks want to learn more, it's immigrantneighborfund.com. And please, I encourage you guys to, even $5 goes a long way. And we have a backlog of we have over 17,000 people that have applied. We've already had over 2,000 families that have received the funds, and we have a backlog of about 14,000 people. So,
wow.
And it just keeps coming. So,
now I know you have a goal, I think, of 4 million, and
4
you're
million.
1.1 million and change. So there's a ways to go. So you heard it here, everybody. Visit the website and please, support this very important initiative. All right, I'm going to give you the last word, Maria Teresa. It's 2020. Election year. What is your word to the Latinx community, voters? What do they need to do? What's your sort of call to action here?
The call to action is that it's no longer enough to have someone else carry our weight. I will tell you that in the Latino community, we always expect other people to, we work, we contribute, and we get up in the morning asking for the basic respect and aspiration. And we are living the promise oftentimes of our parents. Yet we oftentimes don't think beyond that civic engagement, that is actually why our parents came here. for the most part, right? Oftentimes our parents fled broken systems. America's not broken, but it only thrives if we participate. And we are at the front door of being able to not only open it, but own those keys and making sure that we're participating. So go register to vote. Go to votolatino.org, register to vote. If you want to volunteer, if you text volunteer to 73179, again, 73179, volunteer, we'll get you to work from the comfort of your home. We have already trained over 400 volunteers from your living room, where people could have actually talked to over 175,000 voters to this day since COVID happened. So there's no stopping us, but we need all hands on deck, and we need all talents on deck. Sometimes people say, well, what can I do? What are you really good at? Use that talent to pay it forward and talk to people about the importance of participation.
Wise words. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure having you on today. Maria Teresa Kumar, the founder and president of Voto Latino. My best to you and your family. Stay safe, stay healthy.
And you stay healthy, David. I know that you had COVID, so stay healthy.
Yes. Recovering, yes, thankfully. It's been great. Hope to see you soon in person.
Yeah, me too. Be well. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.